Hey, it's State of State. We got your Nittany Lion update. It's a football discussion with Tom and Justin, so kick back and press play.
With former Penn State and NFL defensive back Justin King, I'm Tom Hannafin. This is State of State. Please like, comment, subscribe, rate us, and turn on notifications. Follow us on social media at State of State Pod. Comment on our YouTube channel. And if you haven't done so already, you can become a member of our YouTube channel. For just 99 cents a month, you can get all upcoming episodes of State of State, plus our entire members-only playlist, ad-free, commercial-free. Hit the join button on our homepage or follow the link in the description of this podcast. State of State is presented by BetOnline. BetOnline continues to be the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting. Whether you're a seasoned fan or a first-time bettor, BetOnline is your ultimate game day companion. With the largest selection of odds on everything from the NBA to college basketball to the NHL and UFC, BetOnline continues to be your number one sports betting source. From every three-pointer to hat tricks, BetOnline has you covered with odds, stats, and more for every game, every play, and every win. State of State is presented by BetOnline. The game starts here. State of State is a proud supporter of Blue White Outfitters. Blue White Outfitters was created as a retail shop meant to highlight the confidence, competitiveness, and fearlessness of the elite athletes found throughout the history of Penn State University. Check out their Lockdown U and Lawn Boys merchandise today. All sales from Blue White Outfitters directly benefit Penn State student athletes. Also, official State of State merchandise is available now. Support the show and grab State of State t-shirts, hoodies, hats, and more. Visit www.bluewhiteoutfitters.com today. Hi, everyone. Welcome to State of State. I'm Tom Hannafin. Today, we are talking about the ramifications for Penn State football regarding the news that came out earlier on this week that the Big Ten and the SEC have gained further control, nearly complete control of the college football playoff beginning in 2026, and that will run through 2031. This is a huge shift in what the college football playoff is going to look like going forward, possibly expanding to 14 or 16 teams, and not even possibly expanding to that point at some point in the future. But the interesting point about 4 automatic qualifiers for both the SEC and the Big Ten, 2 for the ACC, 2 for the Big 12, an at-large bid, and then Notre Dame being considered so long as they would be within the top 14. So there's a lot of elements of this to break down, but focusing on this for Penn State football, this signals that Penn State is in the best possible position that it could be at this point in time. Penn State is primed to be right in the thick of that chase on a perennial basis at this point in time. Now, once this kicks in 2026, you're going to be living in a life where Drew Aller is no longer a Penn State Nittany Lion. The expectation being he will go in the 2026 NFL draft and go high. So there's this whole new world where, yes, you're still going to have to be very, very conscientious of the competition that exists within the Big Ten, and that with having the more uniform rules, the more uniform layout, I think this is fantastic for college football. I think it's fantastic ultimately for Penn State football within the Big Ten to just have a decided understanding of what you have to do. We can put this argument of best versus deserving to bed. The rankings, the eyeball tests, these sorts of things, hopefully will begin to go away more and more as you get more decided rules within conference play for both the SEC and the Big Ten of, hey, what do I have to do on the field to get myself into the college football playoff? Now, I believe Penn State is naturally in a great position in 2025. We talked about it extensively on this show that Penn State should credibly compete for the national championship in 2025 based on the pieces they have returning. Certainly questions about the pieces that are left on defense and the pieces that they are still missing offensively, notably at wide receiver. We're going to touch on that subject later on this week here on State of State and have Ryan Roberts from A to Z Sports on to give his opinion on Kyron Hudson, the USC transfer, and also Devontae Ross, the Troy transfer. So we'll get to that later on this week here on State of State. But in regard to this control that the Big Ten and the SEC have over the college football playoff, I think there's some interesting things that came up out of this reporting. Ross Dellinger from Yahoo Sports did a phenomenal job. It's the fact that there was a point where the Big Ten and the SEC could essentially hold up the rest of college football, FBS for that matter, at proverbial gunpoint and say, we'll bounce if you don't give us control. It shows you the shift in power and the obvious money that is behind these two conferences and the power that both the Big Ten and the SEC have at this point in time. I think it sets up Penn State in a very advantageous way because right now, you look at the top 4 of the Big Ten that made it into the college football playoff this past season. Naturally, you had Oregon winning the Big Ten championship. And then you had Penn State, Indiana, and Ohio State. Ohio State as a quote unquote at large, same with Indiana, same with Penn State, going on to do great things within the college football playoff. Penn State and Ohio State, obviously, Indiana getting bounced in the first round, but still making it into the playoff. And then you had Illinois arguing that they should have been given consideration over some other schools. And you had the infamous line by Kirk Herbstreit, deserving versus best. And I think a lot of that was focused, especially around the first round blowouts you saw, especially Indiana versus Notre Dame. Notre Dame handled that game very, very much. Penn State blew out SMU. So this is a holistic view at this top 4, and that even looking into 2025, you should have a reasonable expectation that Ohio State will be potentially the best team in the Big Ten heading into next season. If it's not Ohio State, it's certainly Penn State, in my opinion. Oregon replacing Dylan Gabriel with Dante Moore, that's a big question mark. A lot of pieces off to the National Football League and their regular churn from the transfer portal. So they're going to have to address some things. But I think it's reasonable to put Ohio State, Penn State, and Oregon in the top 3. That 4th spot, I think that's where things start to get interesting, is that you're looking at Indiana. I think Indiana, we have to give them the benefit of the doubt. I understand there's going to be a lot of haters out there in regards to what their record was, who they played. They blew out a lot of bad teams, that sort of thing. They got beaten early in the college football playoff in a blowout. But still, Kurt Cignetti has shown that he can win. And I think the Indiana football program has also shown that they're prepared to invest a lot of money into the success of that program. So I don't necessarily expect them to just fall off a cliff in 2025. What is that going to look like with Fernando Mendoza as its starting quarterback, the transfer from Cal? Going to be a lot of changes. It's not going to look the same as it did under Curtis Rourke, but we're going to have to wait and see. So that 4th spot, as I mentioned, is a bit of a question mark. What is Michigan next year? Michigan, a down year last year, obviously, but Mikey Keene, the transfer from Fresno State, is he the number 1 starter on day one? Is it Bryce Underwood, the highly touted recruit that Michigan grabbed from LSU in the commitment process? That could change things. And even if it is Bryce Underwood, how quickly does he begin to be an effective starter for what Michigan is trying to do? Illinois, returning Luke Altmaier, losing some pieces on the offense in terms of wide receiver that were valuable to him last season, especially along the defensive line. That was a strong defensive line, but Brett Bielema likes to run the ball effectively and play good defense. So Altmaier plays in very well to what their scheme could be. I expect Illinois to be in the mix. Nebraska, some people at best have seen them at 10-2, their last 2 games being their toughest games. And one of them is at Penn State and then versus Iowa. So that's just even looking into 2025 that you feel comfortable saying that Penn State might be the best team in the Big Ten coming back next year. Or if you want to give the benefit of the doubt to the national champions, the Ohio State Buckeyes, okay, that's maybe the best team in the Big Ten. But you have Penn State 1 or 2. But even looking beyond that, I think that's where this starts to get more and more interesting. And there's more pressure put on these conferences, especially the Big Ten and the SEC. And I think there's certainly going to be pressure put on teams that are in the bottom half of these leagues to perform. For so long, we've seen a variety of teams, both the Big Ten and the SEC, that are just perennial bottom feeders. They're just content to roll the football out there and be like, well, we have a program and people showed up to the stadium and we sold a few t-shirts. We're happy about that. Well, there's going to be an evaluation process as life moves forward with this new playoff, the new control that the Big Ten and the SEC have. Is you're ultimately going to be in a position where every single year you're evaluating every single dollar that is going to these schools. And you're asking yourself, well, if you're in the SEC and everybody is getting an equal share, or some schools are getting more than others, that sort of thing. Well, why the hell are we giving Mississippi State the same as Georgia, for instance. The rich get richer, the haves versus the have-nots, that sort of argument. Penn State is so fortunate to be in the position that it's in and is trending in the right direction at exactly the right time. Now, even looking beyond 2025, as I mentioned, I think there is going to be a lot that Penn State is going to have to deal with in that initial year with the 4 automatic qualifiers. And that I don't think that's necessarily going to be automatic. You're going to have to see a lot of different things play out, but you're going to lose, theoretically, Drew Auer, Nick Singleton, Katron Allen, most of your offensive line, Zane Durant, Dennis Sutton, Zakee Wheatley. Like, you're going to lose some pieces, some significant pieces. It's not to say that Penn State doesn't have talent waiting in the wings, reloading, developing, grabbing people in the transfer portal appropriately, recruiting extremely well. But you're going to move into a whole new era of Penn State football under James Franklin, but it's going to look very, very different. And it's all going to start with Ethan Grunkemeyer, if he is indeed that starter in 2026. So you go from a year in 2025, as I just outlined, that you feel very confident that Penn State should be one of the top 2 teams within the Big Ten overnight almost. And when all of this kicks off, and when you potentially see the playoff expand to 14 teams in 2026, and who knows how long thereafter it turns into 16 teams, is that more automatic qualifiers for Penn State, and especially for the SEC. More information is going to get hammered out about this week. We understand meetings in New Orleans, but also over the coming weeks and months, we're hopefully going to get some more fine-tuned details. Penn State is going to have to continue to press to make sure that they are at the front of the line in the Big Ten, because even we have talked about it for so long on this show, is that log jam of teams trying to make their way into that 4th spot, 5th spot, 6th spot, just trying to make sure that you're competitive, even for a good bowl game, a major bowl game, but to get into the college football playoff, that's going to become even more cutthroat. So I think Penn State is just in a fantastic position right now with the staff that they've built. Retaining Andy Kotelnicki, are you able to keep him beyond 2025? It looked like he was off to be West Virginia's head coach a few months ago and was able to be retained by James Franklin and company. Say theoretically you only have him for one more season. Okay, well, now you're going into an off season that is even more important. You got a new quarterback and Ethan Grunkemeyer, or whomever is that starter, and potentially a new offensive coordinator into this brand new world where there's 4 spots and you have to compete. You have to compete immediately. So say Penn State is competing for the national championship next year, or at least in the playoff, or at least making a deep run, all those sorts of things. That 2026 year is going to be a really, really big deal for Penn State. How long do you have Jim Knowles for? Jim Knowles, he's made it very clear his goal was to have the number 1 defense and to win a national championship. Can Penn State accomplish all those things in 2025? Does Jim Knowles want to stick around in Penn State for multiple years? He signed a 3-year contract, but as we all know in college football, anybody can get grabbed at any time and taken off to another school. We all saw that, unfortunately, recently with Ja'Juan Seider, grabbed by Notre Dame as a running backs coach, but then Penn State and James Franklin, hats off to him. Going to get Stan Drayton, the former head coach from Temple, spent time in the National Football League, coaching a bevy of fantastic running backs, spent time at Texas, spent time elsewhere in college football, has had a lot of really, really good experience, and has coached up a lot of some of the most talented running backs that have performed at the college level or in the NFL ranks. It's hard to tell whether or not this is going to be an upgrade over Ja'Juan Seider because of the personal side. I think Ja'Juan Seider so endeared himself to the Penn State football program, the community, the players. There's still going to be an effort to try and pick up where Seider left off. Messiah Mickens has confirmed his official visit, running back commit for 2026. So Keemon Spell is another one for 2027 that Penn State is looking ahead on. It was like, okay, we're going to be able to retain these guys and then pick up where Singleton and Katron leave off after they depart school, theoretically, for the 2026 NFL draft. So there's a lot of things that are going to have to fall into place, but you feel really strongly about the way that Penn State has built its coaching staff and has done a nice job recruiting and developing players. Still a lot of things to be addressed in terms of personnel. The wide receiver situation. Again, I'm going to be talking with Brian Roberts a little bit later on this week, getting his thought process on this. But realistically, also, this year will mark we believe, the last of the spring portal for the transfer portal, which will open immediately after whatever the spring game looks like for Penn State and for the rest of the country. So I'm personally a big fan of that. I think that having the two windows makes it very, very difficult for roster building and retention. It makes sense to address that at one point in the year. And then realistically, I know there's a lot of Penn State fans that are hoping that Penn State will go grab a wide receiver out of the transfer portal. I'm of the opinion that there really aren't any game changers at wide receiver left in the transfer portal. Pretty much the game of musical chairs has happened. And the guys that do go into the portal following spring ball, they're probably not number ones. They're probably 2s, 3s, 4s, and 5s. Guys who got beat out for jobs and they're like, you know what? Screw this. I'm going to go somewhere else. Or, hey, screw this. I'm going to go make more money someplace else. And Penn State's made it very clear they go to the transfer portal for positions of need and fit. And if it doesn't fit, Penn State doesn't just splurge and spend the money on it. I think Penn State, unfortunately, learned its lesson the hard way with Julian Fleming this past year. Julian Fleming, while he was a culture fit, a program fit, on the field, the production did not match whatever that investment was, clearly. So I think Penn State is going to be a lot more calculated, not that they haven't been in regards to looking for wide receivers, but if you just think they're just going to take somebody, anybody out of the portal, you have no idea what that crop is really going to look like. And also, again, to the points I was just saying, this is going to be a class of people that go into the transfer portal after spring ball that are not alphas, game changers, game wreckers, that sort of thing. Penn State's desperate for a wide receiver number one. Is that Kyron Hudson? Is that Devontae Ross? Is it somebody who's already on the roster but has yet to get that opportunity and really develop into that spot? We're going to have to wait and see. So this adjustment with the college football playoff, it was inevitable once you saw the expansion of the playoff, and then especially the outcry from a lot of different teams. And like, yes, it was a lot of SEC fans and the SEC teams that were ticked off that they were excluded from the college football playoff, the Alabamas, the Ole Misses, South Carolina. Illinois was somebody who had a credible argument based on those other three teams I just mentioned, saying, well, if you're complaining, we should be complaining. So this felt inevitable. And I think the downside, of course, you would like to continue to see the parity and the fair opportunity for every league within FBS to get into the dance, so to speak, very similar to the college basketball model, and that everybody is getting a chance to compete. And even that model is going to be expanding potentially. But if anything, the concept of the super leagues, Big Ten and SEC, I'm not opposed to it because I think we all know where the best ball is in FBS. If this leads to less cupcake games, I think that's a win for college football fans. I think if this leads to a Big Ten versus SEC challenge type situation for non-conference games, I think that's a win. I think you're going to potentially see more teams that are outside of the Power Two try and grab non-conference games with Power Two teams early in the season. I'm hoping this does away with like the random SEC games against like Mercer and Citadel in November that no one wants to watch. The downside for this, and it's been the challenge that we saw, and Penn State's dealing with it now, getting into winter workouts, where Penn State's scaling back winter workouts because the season went into January. Before, you wrapped up your regular season the end of November, and then you got maybe 3-4 weeks off, 5 weeks sometimes, and then you played a bowl game, and then you were done. Penn State's been playing consistently, and you got a lot of players that are taking their time to recover and trying to get ready for next season. So if you add more games, if you add more to the playoff structure in terms of, is there a play in to the playoff from within these two larger conferences, the Big Ten and the SEC, creates more games, creates more opportunities. It's more revenue for everybody. I'm sure, there's a lot of TV network executives out there that are very happy about that. And unfortunately, that's the business side of this thing. But in terms of evaluating your roster and understanding who you can get out there and who you have to protect, it's going to make it a real challenge. More games, more bumps and bruises, James Franklin likes to say, for your players, and making sure that your team is at its best possible health situation, whatever you want to call it, by the time you get to a major opportunity in the playoff. it's going to get harder and harder. So there's a lot of things that every team is going to be dealing with here. But Penn State football is really, really well positioned at this point in time, thanks to James Franklin and Pat Kraft for their commitment to this. Renovating Beaver Stadium is coming at a really, really good time, and there are a lot of changes that have happened on that front that I think are a good sign for Penn State football and its longevity, continuing to upgrade Penn State's facilities, upgrading what they can do for recruits and what you can offer them realistically outside of, yes, it's the education, it's the experience at Penn State, but here's what this program offers to you that potentially nobody else can offer. And this is a major bargaining chip. Not that the Big Ten, the SEC didn't already have the biggest chips to play, but this really gives Penn State a leg up, and they are perfectly positioned to take advantage of this. However, this does now put a lot more emphasis, not necessarily on 2025. The win now feeling is even stronger. You have the roster, you have the staff to win now in 2025. And I hope the goal is to win a national championship in 2025. Not necessarily it does feel like a boom or bust situation. I've talked about that in the past, but especially when you look at 2026 now and that cutthroat competition to be one of those 4 automatic qualifiers. And Penn State's roster is going to turn over quite a bit. What will the Nittany Lions look like at that point in time? So we're going to have to wait and find out. Thank you for joining me here on State of State. Still so many more developments that have to come in regards to Penn State and their role within the college football playoff now that the Big Ten and the SEC have far more control. Join me later on this week. A to Z Sports Ryan Roberts will hop on State of State and give us a little bit more insight from an outside perspective in regard to what Penn State's wide receivers are going to look like in 2025. Is there reason for optimism? We're going to dive into all that here on State of State. Thank you all so much for joining us. This episode and our entire library of shows is available now on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcasts. Please like, comment, subscribe, rate us, and turn on notifications. Follow us on social media at State of State Pod. Comment on our YouTube channel. And if you haven't done so already, you can become a member of our YouTube channel. For just 99 cents a month, you can get all upcoming episodes of State of State, plus our entire members-only playlist, ad-free, commercial-free. Hit the join button on our homepage or follow the link in the description of this podcast. State of State is presented by Bet Online and by Blue White Outfitters.